What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Muscle Memoirs Podcast. Today, I am joined by Chris Tuttle, IFBB Pro, registered dietitian, and Animal Pack athlete. Chris, how you doing today, my man?
Good, man. Good. Very good.
We had some brief technical difficulties before getting this set up, but it looks like everything's good to go, and I'm very excited to dive into our topics of discussion today. So, as it appears, we have a pretty similar background in regards to formal education, and I'm quite keen to get more of your insight and experience about your role in clinical dietetics. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you did work as a clinical dietitian for a period of time.
Yes, correct. For at least 5 years, about 5 years. Yeah, I think it may about 5 years. Worked as a clinical dietitian. I was a floater, so I was never assigned to any one floor. I at first got a job at a small hospital near me in Connecticut where there's only one dietitian on staff at a time. So we did everything, even including the tray line. Yeah. So that was interesting and hectic, but it was cool. I liked it because, as a dietitian, you're kind of working at your own pace. You can fly through it or you fly not, but, being by myself sometimes is, it's peaceful, and, go to the office, crank it up, see what's going on, see the problem patients first, and then kind of work your way down to low to moderate risk. And then I worked at a bigger hospital near me, the Hospital Center of Connecticut, where I was a floater, and we worked with. There's always 6 dietitians on staff at all times during the work week, and everybody's usually assigned to each floor. But I was always the fill-in for anybody else, and a little bit of ICU, a little bit of oncology, and I would say those are probably my 2 favorite floors. Is one, you get very, very clinical and technical. And the other one is just, you're legitimately making a difference in someone's life, at the end of life, unfortunately, but helping them with through cancer. And then obviously the GI floors, you got the GI floors and the cardiac unit, which, they're okay, but it's kind of repetitive,
Excellent. And I'll take it you've been interested in bodybuilding for quite some time, and you were definitely a bodybuilder while you were in school, completing your degree, doing your dietetic internship. So I am curious, did you always think that you were going to go into clinical, or did you go into nutrition thinking I'm obviously going to go into sports nutrition, or you always had this idea that you were going to work with bodybuilders? What was the plan originally with pursuing nutrition?
I've always been a one-track minded person, meaning what I was interested in that period of time, in that particular time, was what I was all into. So there was never any severe long-term plan. It was more like, well, I know I want to make it to step 2. I got to step 2, oh, okay, I'll go step 3, and so on. So to elaborate on that, when I first started lifting weights, it was mainly for the purpose of motocross. I had a motocross trainer, and he made me train more of like a CrossFit style, where it's like resistance training, but high intensity, high speed, short rest between sets to condition for motocross. And my body responded pretty well. So I saw the difference between weight training and how it changed my physique, even being 12 years old. And then he started to teach me about nutrition. He was a very militant trainer. And he would go through my parents' cupboard and just throw everything in the trash. Ritz crackers in the trash. Everything in the trash. And he's like, you need balanced meals. You need protein. You need good carbohydrates. You need fruits, vegetables. And he made it more very scheduled, and maybe eat more solid meals per day. And the thing is this, I actually noticed a big difference. So I saw the effect very quickly on days that I ate well when I raced or when I had to do runs and all that I was attracted to eating well. So that sparked the point of nutrition, but I love the training. So really over the years of me getting into training, I saw the effect that weight training had on my body. So I eventually started to veer towards more of a bodybuilding style, meaning how could I get my body to respond more like this? And then I realized down the road that my first 2 years in college that I didn't want to be a strength coach. I thought nutrition was more interesting, and then I could see how much more you can change your body faster with nutrition. than with just training. So then I started to go in the direction of becoming a dietitian. Thought like, oh, I could definitely be a dietitian, teach nutrition. That's cool. But at that point, there's no way I was like, oh, I want to be clinical or I want to work in oncology or long-term care. I had no idea at that point. But I did start to compete after I finished racing motocross. And how it all started with helping bodybuilders was, I hired some guy to help me. I didn't do very well. Nothing that he did wrong, but I just didn't. And then I picked up a bunch of books, Chris Aceto's books, and I had some general knowledge of nutrition. I was in school, and then I prepped myself for a show, and I did really well. And I made a huge difference in a 12-month period. And a couple of people from my gym noticed that, and they asked me what I did, and I told them, and they said, "Hey, do you mind if you could help me?" And I said, "Well, listen, I don't really know what I'm doing, but if you give me $50, I'll help you with your prep." And then I helped that person, and that person did well. And then their friend said, "Wow, you made a big difference from last year. What did you do?" I'm like, "Oh, my friend at the gym helped me." "Well, do you think you can put in a good word and have him help me too?" And that's how that started. So really that was like 17 years in the making. And I never, ever thought that would become a more than full-time business home with my wife and I. It kind of morphed into something bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger over the years, to the point I had to quit the hospital because I was making more money, a lot more money, working with people on the internet and helping people prep through shows. And I could be home, and it was a little more motivating than teaching people, the counting carbohydrates in the hospital who are non-compliant diabetics who are just going to come back in the next week doing the same thing, And plus, as you know, the hospital, there's a lot of politics involved in like what you teach each patient versus like what the hospital down the street teaches their patients. It's slightly different. So that was frustrating, how everything was like a protocol, You couldn't really super individualize anything. That was for the outpatient care, which was, in my opinion, not very effective either. So I became more self-gratifying, helping people who would want to be helped. And that's how it kind of turned into. But, most people don't know is majority of my clients are actually general weight loss, nutrition-related disease, and exercise performance. Only about probably maybe 30% of my clientele is actual bodybuilders. Yeah. A lot of bodybuilders will come, a lot of people will come from the bodybuilders being like, "Hey, so-and-so did a crazy transmission. I don't want to bodybuild, but I would like to be that lean for my wedding." You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And that's how that would start. And then you get a lot of people like that.
Very cool. So many of the things you said there definitely resonate with me. And I do think it's really interesting that as an IFBB pro and someone who's so involved in the bodybuilding scene, that the vast majority of your clients are just the general population and people looking to lose weight, reverse some comorbidities, and feel a little bit better. With that being said, I do think it's absolutely fantastic that as an RD, you are involved in this fitness industry and you are prepping other bodybuilders, because when it comes to bodybuilding coaches, especially on the NPC or IFBB side, it's not usually people with a formal education in nutrition. With that being said, would you say that when it comes to coaching your bodybuilders specifically, that there's anything generally that you think you place a much larger emphasis on as a coach compared to other coaches in the industry because of your formal education?
Yeah. So there's a lot of, in the general idea of coaching in bodybuilding, the goal, unfortunately, no matter what, doesn't matter on your health, is to get to a particular look, no matter any means necessary. Okay. So that can mean drugs. That can mean the most off the wall diets ever. Like I've seen off-season diets of people with fast food, refined carbs, sugar cereal, honey buns, junk, beef, sloppy Joe mix, and no vegetables. Like it's like whatever gets the job done. Yeah, you might be getting the job done to a degree, but you're not feeling very good. And a lot of bodybuilders in the NBC and IFBB have a lot of digestive issues. I have many theories on that, which we'll get into later. Mm-hmm. But what I usually do is I balance. Like people look at me like I'm crazy when they go, "You leave fruit in the diet for a contest prep?" And they go, "Yeah, man, I'm eating fruit all up till the last 2 days before the show." "Really? But it has sugar in it." And I'm like, "What?" I'm like, then they're worried about fructose, but they're over there eating a blueberry muffin who has 40 grams of added sugar. And then you got about that's enough fructose in that blueberry muffin to equal like a whole pound of pineapple, They have no idea. So my diet's a little more balanced, and I take into a lot of consideration of GI and gut health, because if the gut health is not operating well, you're not going to be able to really get the same condition, and you're not going to feel the same. You're not going to perform the same. Coming from somebody who has ulcerative colitis, I haven't had a symptom in years, but I understand how much it affects my look, how I feel, how I perform. And if you're not taking care of your insides, eventually over time, you're not going to be able to perform the same. You're not going to be able to digest food the same, and you're not going to look the same, But it's unfortunate because too many people go down the most unhealthy route of all time when it comes to bodybuilding. Unhealthy. Like sometimes I say to myself, I don't know how not more people are dead in the industry.
That segues very nicely into our primary topic of discussion today, which is nutrition for the off season, and kind of managing all of these micro variables which we need to account for in that, especially for the NPC IFBB side of things, but even a lot of naturals. There comes a point in the off season where a lot of people kind of have to force food down in order to put on the pounds, in order to recover from hard training. And like you mentioned, when calories get so high, some people do tend to displace some very important foods in the diet simply to get the calories in. And that's probably not the best way to go about it. And there's likely a much superior middle ground that people need to consider, rather than just eating a bunch of crap in the off season in order to push their body weight, and then eating completely clean while they're dieting in order to manage hunger and other things. You probably need to follow a pretty healthy diet year round, and that could potentially lead to better long-term outcomes for the athlete. So diving into our first topic here, which is macronutrient considerations for bodybuilders in the off season. For those who are struggling with their appetite, do you tend to manipulate protein to some degree? As we kind of know the science behind protein, it's typically portrayed as the most satiating macronutrient. And as bodybuilders, we tend to eat a lot of protein. We need a lot of protein in order to maximize muscle mass and grow. But does there come a point in the off season where hunger is low and it's difficult to get the calories in, that maybe we should bump protein down from the commonly recommended 1 gram per pound?
Yeah. So how am I going to answer that? That is very individualistic. All right. So I'm going to try to be as clear as I can with this complex schematic I have in my head in that problem. So if I have somebody that is not gaining weight, they're not hungry, their appetite is tapped, and they're not feeling well, I'll look at their diet very carefully, and I'll start to ask them, are you choosing a lot of potatoes? Sometimes people are like, well, yeah, I eat two potato meals a day. I'm like, okay, so you're consuming 180 carbs a day of potatoes. I go, let's first start by removing that. Let's do all white rice. Let's do cream of rice. Things that are easy to digest, easy to get down. Obviously, your fruits, and keep your vegetables, and then go from there. If they were not eating potatoes and they were just eating rice, and their vegetable intake usually in the off season, most bodybuilders are not high, obviously, because you're fitting on the other food, then I might look at their total protein intake. I'm never a high protein intake guy anyway. So I'm already considering in the normal IFBB, I was 262 pounds and I was only eating 285 grams of protein, So in retrospect to what the norm is in this industry, people are like, oh, you need 400 grams. No, I feel much better on 5 ounces of protein per meal, much better. I might lower protein, but I would probably honestly lower it to 1 pound, 1 gram per pound of body weight, depending on their body fat composition, of course. If they're a generally heavier guy, that's a little different story, carrying more body fat, that might take into different consideration. But I usually will look at the types of carbs and their format, because the things that affect appetite in the off season people don't realize is, one, people become too repetitive with their meals. They start to lose some disinterest of their food. They don't put the effort into making good food that tastes good to them. They just want fast. Well, throwing together boiled chicken, baked chicken, white rice, and frozen green beans and putting hot sauce on it, that's not going to do it. It's not going to work, The other thing is sporadic sleep. If their sleep schedule is constantly changing, that disrupts appetite, I think, almost more than anything. If you're on a set schedule every day, you're going to bed at 9, 10 o'clock, you're getting up at 6 a.m. every day. Your meals are on point and on schedule. If you sleep into 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, and now you got to get 6 meals in before you go to bed, those meals are going to be crammed. And then by that end of that day, you're going to be stuffed, which carries over into the next day of a low appetite, and then it snowballs. So sleep patterns, I look at sleep patterns. I look at stress, of course. I look at the carbohydrate content. And if they are high protein, I might bring them down to 1 gram per pound of body weight. Because most bodybuilders psychologically are not going to tolerate that well. You bring them down to 180 grams a day, they're going to lose their mind, you know? So, and some, you know, some people comment about like what things bodybuilders do, but as you know, when you're dealing with any type of clientele, there is the ideal, there's the optimal, and then there's what they will actually do. See, sometimes you got to be halfway in the middle, you know, like I might have a guy come to me who's eating 400 grams. Do you think he's really going to go down to 200 grams? Not a chance. So I might be like, you know what? We're going to go to 300. And then after a while, bring it down again without him really noticing. Because as soon as he sees the difference from 400 to 300, how much better he feels, he starts to gain more trust in the process. If it's too off the wall, then it won't make a difference. But the biggest other appetite killers are condiments. People overdo condiments, sweeteners, and dried spices that contain dried garlic and onion, get a lot of gas, intestinal bloat, which makes you not want to eat. I usually will eliminate broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, garlic, and onion in the off season, and have them do more fresh herbs, cilantro, basil, salt, pepper, cumin, things like that can, you know, you can add some flavor and some spice, even curry, but you're not adding all the stuff that's make you gassy and bloated. Because sometimes, you know, you can eat something very small that gets you gassed and bloated, and you don't want to eat anything else, even though you only ate 300 calories, you know? So it's really finding, you know, easy things to eat. And one of the other biggest things too is the way people cook chicken. They're not using a thermometer to cook it. They're just throwing it on the grill, burning it, probably internal temperature of like 225 degrees Fahrenheit, and it's dry, and they're eating 6 ounces per meal 5 times a day, and they're like, dude, I have to drink like a gallon of water to choke it down. I'm like, start putting a little more effort into your chicken, and stop buying the chicken that's $1 a pound. You know, put a little effort into a little higher end chicken like Bell and Evans or something. You know?
Yeah, fantastic. So it sounds like to me that in terms of protein content, we're probably going to keep this baseline of 1 gram per pound. Maybe it's worth lowering if you're very high, but protein is probably something we want to touch last in this discussion. And we definitely want to look at a variety of other factors before we start thinking about manipulating protein for an athlete who's struggling with their appetite.
Yeah. Well, in other words, you know, for those people who are listening, you can look at the meal plan and see where you're at. If you're at 3 grams of protein per body weight, that might be the first thing I would change. But if you're at 1 gram or 1.5 grams of protein per pound of body weight, and you're generally a lean guy, then you might want to look at the other things you're doing too. Because potatoes are brutal. They make you feel so full, especially boiled potatoes. And if you're cooking rice once every 5 days, it's going to be, you know, the resistant starches. It's going to get dry, crunchy, hard to digest. So there's a lot of other things you can do to help that, you know?
Transitioning to our other macronutrients and looking at the carbohydrate and fat content in the diet, you reference that there are some particular carbohydrate sources which might leave you a little more full. But when it comes to the general ratio of carbohydrate to fat in the diet, do you notice any general trends? Obviously, there's going to be the individual's food preferences, what they feel best on. But when it comes to your top level bodybuilders, have you noticed that perhaps following a higher carbohydrate, lower fat approach tends to work a little bit better in terms of keeping their appetite up, not getting too full after meals, and just ultimately being able to consume all of their food for the day?
I guess you have to define lower fat. So I generally will do the highest 0.5 grams of fat per pound of body weight. Okay. So it's 200-pound male at 100 grams at most, but sometimes less. I might even go into 0.25. Now that's added fat, excluding red meat. I'll count red meat, I'll count yolks, and I'll count the added fats. I'm not really going to get too wild about the fat in chicken. But there is some degree of that, but I'm never a high fat guy unless they have severe digestive issues. And then I will have them run more fats to get the calories in versus so many carbs, because people go low carbs, their stomach feels great, because you don't have those gas forming carbohydrates and fibers in the intestinal tract. But fats are funny. It's like you get to the point, like I would say my best bodybuilder I have, the amount of food he was eating in a day, you would look at it. I had to do double takes sometimes on how much food it was. It's like 130 carbs per meal, 7 meals a day, 40 grams of protein per meal, and like 20 grams of fat. And he's like, I'm hungry. It's like, what? So at some point, I'm like, what are you going to do? Eat 200 grams of carbs per meal? It's going to take him 25 minutes to eat every meal, So at that point, sometimes I start adding a little more fats to that point. But at some point, I don't really worry about calculations anymore. So like once a progression starts and the individual has a plan and you're progressing off that plan, I don't care what the numbers are. Like I'm not being like, all right, so say if we're at 100 grams of fat, 800 carbohydrates, and say 300 grams of protein, like from that point, the protein's going to stay the same and fats will stay the same. And I'll keep adding carbs to a point where they're like, oh man, like they're not gaining weight, but they're complaining how hard it is to get the meals down. Then I might start adding fats because it's easy to eat 210 calories of nuts, versus 210 calories of rice. You know what I mean? So it's a little easier way to get in there. But I do like to have a more balanced profile. I'm not a person that is low fat by definition of RD, under 40 grams, or like having a 280-pound bodybuilder eating 40 grams of fat a day or 50 grams of fat a day, and then the rest is like 1,000 carbs. It won't be like that. It'll range between 50 and 100 grams of fat, and then the macronutrient that gets added for weight gain or weight loss at that point will be just carbohydrates. Carbs go up, go up, go up, go up, and then I'll carb cycle too to help with their appetite. So, you can't eat 1,000 carbs every day, and then eventually I might do 2 low days of 500 carbs to kind of give their digestive system a break and their mental mind a break from eating that much food.
Absolutely. And so it does sound like we're kind of setting a minimum threshold for fat, something to get in, enough healthy fats in the diet for vital functions such as fat-soluble vitamin transport, hormone production, and everything else. And we're just kind of stacking carbs until it gets to a point where it really doesn't make sense to add too many more carbs, and it might be easier just to get our calories from additional fat sources.
Yeah, and what you said too, and if you're natural versus not natural, like a natural bodybuilder can't ever do a low-fat diet. That's a horrible idea because that's involved in hormone production. Obviously, a bodybuilder who's not natural, it doesn't matter. They have exogenous forms of hormones going in, so you can get away with 40 grams of fat a day in a prep, and they're not going to get too low testosterone, but it's important to look at the macronutrient profile, cholesterol, saturated fat, and fats overall in a natural guy. They might be doing more red meat and more whole eggs for that reason.
Yeah, absolutely. I've definitely seen some of within the literature and within some of the coaches who primarily coach natural bodybuilders is that 0.5 grams per kg is kind of this floor during contest prep for naturals. We really don't want to see fat intake get below that for that population. You mentioned how there becomes a point where it is easier to get your calories in through added fats, like your example with nuts. What comes to mind when I hear that is also the potential of adding in more liquid calories. So what is your take on potentially increasing the frequency of protein shakes for some of those whole meals for someone in the off season struggling with their appetite?
That can be a double-edged sword, So there's that theory, sometimes if you consume a whole food shake and you're drinking it, you're bypassing the first realm of digestion, right? Your mouth, So you have obviously enzymes that can help break down some food by chewing, breaking it up, and it slowly enters the stomach. So think of how long it takes to consume 800 calories, right, of food, and then how long it takes to drink 800 calories of a whole food shake. It's like your stomach is just getting like shotgunned 800 calories right to the stomach, and sometimes that can leave people bloated for an extended period of time, especially if they're consuming shakes that are packed with maltodextrin or whatever they're using for carbohydrates. But I do utilize shakes, but to be honest with you, Whole Foods is where it's at when it comes to gaining. I don't know why. It's an anecdotal thing that I've seen with my clients. The people that use more meat get better results. They grow better, they get stronger, they have less digestive issues. Those who constantly focus just on yogurt, egg whites, and whey shakes just don't respond the same. It doesn't make any sense. I can't tell you why. It's just what I see. And then, I don't know if you know Stan Efferding. Stan Efferding makes a great point. It's like if you have 40 grams of protein from egg whites, you have 40 grams of protein from red meat. Look at how much more micronutrients you're getting with that red meat. And you're getting almost nothing in the egg white, So that doesn't mean egg whites are bad. It just means if you go one extreme to the other, it can potentially negate some effects. And of course, genetics make a difference. But I will utilize shakes for those. But what I usually will do is they'll have whey, but they'll be eating a bowl of cream of rice, nut butter and mashed up banana or fruit. So that way it's like you're still getting some macronutrients. You're not just drinking a straight powdered shake, right? Animal meal is a meal replacement that's not made from whey. It's made from pea protein, beef protein. It gets its fat from olive oil and egg yolk. So it's more micronutrient dense and it's more of a meal. And a lot of my clients will use that and then they'll just add frozen fruit to it or more fat to it to jack up the calories in that shake. And that seems to work for the landscapers, construction workers. It's hot outside and they're sweating. I mean, who wants to stop to eat 2 cups of rice and steak at 1 o'clock in the afternoon when it's 100 degrees outside, where they could drink the shake and then keep going.
Yeah, fantastic. As you mentioned, I definitely don't think the role of the food matrix should be underestimated, and just the impact of the synergy of multiple different vitamins and minerals within these whole food sources and the potential impact that can have on your physique. Like you mentioned, compare a steak to a whey protein shake. There's definitely a lot more going on within that steak, and the same can go for some dairy products or having a whole egg just as compared to egg whites. There's certainly a role there with the nutrients those are providing.
For sure. And you feel different. You just feel different,
Mm-hmm. Staying on this concept of carbohydrates and getting more into the specifics here. Personally, I love looking at people's diets. I'm interested in what people eat. Those muscle and strength videos on YouTube where it goes through a day of eating with bodybuilders, they fascinate me, mostly because every time I watch one of them, it's 6 to 7 meals of white rice and steak or chicken, and there is not a single fruit or vegetable to be found, which I think we would both disagree with. Even in the context of the off season where it's important to get the food in, I don't think it's an excuse to not have any fruits or vegetables whatsoever. So with that being said, I am curious if you kind of have any minimum thresholds for health that you like to maintain in the off season. So what immediately comes to my mind is that while it might be a good idea to limit some of these things like potatoes or your total intake of fruits and vegetables and fiber, just to ease the digestive tract and to make sure that you're not getting too full after each meal, it's probably a good idea to still have some of these things in the diet. So do you have any specifics that you like to use? Maybe 10 grams of fiber per 1,000 calories, or still try to get 4 to 5 servings of fruits and vegetables per day? Anything there?
Yeah. So it's really, again, it's kind of individual, right? So a lot of bodybuilders, believe it or not, don't like vegetables. They have all this discipline, but they don't have discipline to eat vegetables, right? So I'll first ask them, hey, I don't see any vegetables in your diet. Do you not like vegetables? I hate vegetables. All right, well, let's make a compromise. Let's do a handful of organic wilted spinach in a pan every morning and divide it up into 3 meals. Can you do that? I guess I can do that, right? So you work with them to that degree. But I like people to have, say if they're doing 6 meals a day, I would like 3 of those meals to contain vegetables. Doesn't have to be a lot. It just has to be some. Like a bodybuilder portion, obviously, a cup and a half of broccoli is, a few servings to the CA. But as long as they get vegetables in, I'm okay with that. And sometimes I'll ask them how much, and rarely is it too much until it gets to contest prep, and then that's a whole other can of wax. But usually like a handful of spinach, a couple carrots. I encourage mushrooms, peppers, zucchini, green beans are fine, asparagus in limited amounts, and then I don't allow broccoli, Brussels sprouts, or cauliflower just because of the gas bloating issues that can affect appetite. If they have an iron stomach and they're crushing it and they can eat anything, then I don't care. And then fruits, usually twice a day, sometimes 3 times a day. But I find that a lot of people actually starting to enjoy the fruits in almost every meal because, pineapple white rice, right? Like adding things. So it's easy to eat 30 grams of carbs of fruit. It's not necessarily super easy to eat 30 grams of carbs of potato, right? So usually I tell people, I'm like, hey man, like, I'll look at their diet to see what fats they're choosing. Oh, you're choosing avocados. Okay, good. You don't have to worry about the potatoes then. Because you get the potassium in there, all nutrients. And then I'll look at the fruits they're choosing. Oh, you got bananas. Okay, then you don't need potatoes, or they don't like potatoes. But generally, I like to have some prebiotics that are rich in the diet during the off season, and most of them are eating oatmeal for breakfast, or some serving an oatmeal for breakfast. The fruits, but most of them are killing the fiber almost too much because of the sheer content of food to begin with. It's like it's really hard to get less than 20 grams of fiber in a day eating 1,000 carbs a day, right? Or even if you're at 500 carbs. So it usually becomes more of an issue actually in contest prep with micronutrients, because they usually start cutting out fruit. They cut out, potatoes, and they're just doing chicken, rice, and steak during a time in a caloric deficit when their body's not getting enough food. So clearly they're not getting enough micronutrients either. So then I usually say, no. The first thing you cut in a contest prep is the white rice. You leave the fruit, the vegetables, the potatoes, the avocado, the nutrient-dense foods alone, and you work with the white rice, cream of rice first, because they're not offering anything except energy. And then the progression will start from there. But I like to have a variety of food, and I'll encourage it. Sometimes in the top of my program, I might say, make sure you have vegetables in 2 meals a day, 3 meals a day, fruits twice a day. Make sure you choose potato or oats once a day. Make sure when you choose your fats, you're choosing, peanut butter, or you're choosing almonds, avocado, or olive oil. Because sometimes they might just go to coconut oil or something else. And then because as bodybuilders, they love repetition and easy. So they'll make the same exact meal 4 or 5 times a day, which I tell them they can't do that. You can do 6 meals. You can repeat the same 3 meals is fine, but the other 3 have to be different. Have to be.
Great insight there. Now I kind of want to transition into more or less some very specific strategies that we can utilize when we're managing hunger in the off season. And I'd like to first start with meal frequency and the potential role of utilizing a higher meal frequency to make it easier to consume a large amount of calories. I think within this evidence-based realm, a lot of people like to kind of poo-poo on the old school bodybuilder. Oh, you have to eat 6 meals a day, and they'll say because, well, it doesn't actually boost your metabolism or anything like that. And then they'll kind of go down this path of saying, well, bodybuilders aren't intelligent or this and that. But at the end of the day, I think this is just part of the culture when it comes to IFBB or NPC bodybuilders, because they have so much food to eat. That's why they eat 6 meals a day. It's not necessarily because they believe in all of these, in this mysticism surrounding a high meal frequency. It's just that if they didn't eat 6 meals per day, there's just no way they would get in the amount of food they need to grow and recover.
Correct. And that's what people come to me and ask. I've had my general pop clients that come to me and they go, hey, how many meals do you want? And they're like, well, what do you think is better? Do I have to eat 6? I'm like, you're female, you're 5'2". And unless you're eating like 1 egg and half a piece of toast, 6 meals a day, you're just eating snacks all day. So really, in what you just said, the amount of meals per day is dependent on how many calories, and how long they're awake. I have some clients that might be awake for 18 hours, or more, or 20 hours. They sleep for 4. So I'm like, oh, dude, I'm not gonna make you go 6.5 hours without eating, So I like to spread the calories out, and I'm a person that likes to spread calories out evenly first and foremost. I'm not one that just centers all the food around pre and post training. I don't necessarily buy into that concept to a degree. And if I do, it's under a certain circumstance. But generally just, say if you have 1,000 carbs, those are evenly divided through 6 meals. And maybe the post-workout meal might have lower fat and maybe just a tick up of carbohydrates, but not like twice the amount of carbohydrates or anything. But meal frequency is important, and because you're trying to maintain that appetite. So, we've all been to a point where we go to brunch for Mother's Day and we hammer a bunch of food, and then we don't want to eat a thing the rest of the day, you know? So that's a perfect case in point. You're sitting there trying to eat 4,000 calories in a sitting. You're going to feel sluggish, tired, and exhausted. And then you might be having gas and bloated. And then, you know, who wants to feel like that? So dividing the meals up in frequency is really dependent on the total calories you need and how long someone's awake. And of course, their preference. If there's somebody that it likes to eat frequently because they have trouble staying on track, then I would do that for them.
Related to meal frequency, there are many hypotheses circulating within the bodybuilding industry as to this phenomenon of the extended gut on stage in many professional bodybuilders and what the mechanism is that is explaining this. Perhaps it has something to do with changes in the drug regimen, but others have speculated that this could just be due to bodybuilders getting progressively larger and as such eating more food than ever and potentially just the waistline stretching from consistently eating so much food. Do you have an opinion on what's going on in the bodybuilding sphere when it comes to this trend in physiques?
Yeah. So the first myth will debunk it right away. People say it's a growth hormone gut. I can tell you every single damn pro bodybuilder, classic physique, and even men's physique guys are using growth hormone. So men's physique guys' waists are pretty damn small, right? So there is a huge, I think there's a large portion you could say it's to the amount of food. You can't be 300 pounds of muscle and have a 28-inch waist. You also can't squat 700 pounds and have like a 25-inch waist, right? The core strength, you see power lifters midsections and strongman midsections, those are like tree trunks because that core is stabilizing that load, right? There's that, there's the food. And then I honestly think a lot of bodybuilders have very, very poor core control. Okay. So obviously, like I've seen bodybuilders who are very big be able to keep their waist very tight and they have very, very insanely strong cores. Seeing people front squat, 550 with no belt, 495 with no belt. That's strong core. You can front squat 405 for reps with no belt. That's an incredible core strength. So I think a lot of it is they overlook the core strength. They might do the abs for the cosmetic portion of it, but they don't actually have core strength. And for those listeners who don't understand the differences, your abs are a part of your midsection. You could define it as a part of your core, but there's transverse abdominis, there's obliques, there's other parts to your core that stabilize your spine that are involved in core stabilization than doing just a sit-up. And you can have great abs and still have a weak core. So I think that's what some people miss. And I really think it's those two. And the other one is they're eating too damn much to fill up. So this is the other problem. If you think about this, and this is where people I think don't understand that you have my biggest bodybuilder who reached an off-season weight of 280 pounds and not fat. The amount of food he was eating to grow is absurd, okay? Now, he's a professional now, but he wasn't during the time eating that much food. Now, look at somebody like Rolly Winkler, somebody who's on stage near 280, 290. The amount of food they need to carb up is they're practically eating the entire day, 3 days before the show, all day. So to consume and carb up on, say, 1,000 to 1,500 carbs or more, it's really hard to do that and be on stage and hold your stomach in to be able to fill out the muscles up top. So there's also that point as well. It's not any one thing. It's definitely multifaceted. And of course, genetics, if somebody has an anterior tilt to their pelvis and their psoas is tight, pulling their stomach forward, their stomach's already, they look like their butt, like a gorilla, their butt sticking out and their stomach sticking forward. We've all seen those people, So you have that as well. But it's not growth hormone. I don't believe it's drugs because we would see that in every division. I really think that it's a lot to do with core musculature, genetics, amount of food they're eating, the carb up process, and of course, if they have digestive issues. I've had digestive issues one year where prejudging my stomach was perfectly flat. And as the day went on, my stomach just got more and more distended. And I could hold it in, but you can still see that the stomach didn't look the same, where it's like kind of like you're exiting Thanksgiving and you have to consciously hold your stomach in because it's so full, right? That's kind of what it felt like, even though that I wasn't really eating much that day.
Cool. Really great stuff there. A couple more points I want to get into and things we've already briefly touched on, but is worth exploring further. So the concept of cheat meals, you've kind of alluded to this example of, a Mother's Day brunch and eating a bunch of food in one sitting, and then you're stuffed for the rest of the day. And it is likely that, this feeling is going to carry over into the following day and make it even hard the following day to get in the amount of food you need. With that being said, would you say that cheat meals are typically advantageous throughout the week, or can it shoot some individuals in the foot and actually they'll just end up subconsciously eating less in the days following, and over the course of the week, the total calories will kind of equal out?
100%. I would honestly say a cheat meal in the off season for most people is not advantageous because they're already eating so much food. So you go out to Red Robin and you slam a big burger, fries, and you have a milkshake. And first of all, it tastes wonderful, right? And then the next day you get up and you're full and then it accumulates. Then you might, because that food is also so greasy, salty, and it tastes so good, that you start to have a decreased taste acuity for the food that you need to eat. And then that can bring your appetite down. Believe it or not, a couple of the bodybuilders I do have that have done the best actually choose not to have cheat meals. They will end up having a meal off plan with their wife or something, where they might have salmon at home and make oven baked French fries or salmon and rice, something that's unmeasured, but it's not like pizza at Ben and Jerry's, it's not like that. Not at all. So most of them are afraid to do it because for that reason, and that carries over. And sometimes that snowballs because this is what happens too. And a lot of bodybuilders listening to this will understand what I mean. They will cheat meal. They'll say they have a messed up day. It's family stuff. The meal got delayed. Then they end up overeating because they're extra hungry when they make up for the calories. Then they didn't feel good that night. And they wake up the next morning and they're like, oh man, my appetite's really poor. I just can't eat all this cream of rice and eggs. I'm going to pick up something at the local breakfast shop on the way. And I'm going to get 2 bacon, egg, and cheeses and drink a shake to get the protein down. Then they do that. Then they slam down their post-workout meal, and they may get 2 more meals in that day, and then they're like, oh, I just can't eat this. Like, I got the calories in there. I'm going to head to Chipotle. I'm going to get a burrito at Chipotle. Then they start eating bad foods, more on the bad side to get the calories in, and then it continues that snowball into that hole. Then they start getting chubby. Losing their appetite, they lose their pumps, and now they're not making any progress. So it's snowballs. Sometimes I tell them, like, if you have a cheat meal today and your appetite's trash the next day, just cut your carbs back by like 30% and just create that hunger again. You're not going to lose muscle in a day. You're not going to take 10 steps backwards, not eating enough calories for a day or two. Just scale it back to get the appetite going and then proceed again.
Great. On the other end of the spectrum, considering potentially utilizing lower calorie days, is this something you ever implement throughout the week in order to re-stimulate appetite? Maybe on an off day from the gym, having lower calories than usual in order to resensitize hunger? Or perhaps do you save this strategy for longer term periods, such as, a 4-week mini cut in the middle of an off season before pushing things again?
Yeah, so I carb cycle with most everybody and people in the off season. I will use carb cycling to agree of bringing calories upwards, not downwards. So they might have more high days, which are their building days, and then implement low days. It might be two to 4 high days followed by a low day and then repeat. But it's not dependent on the training day. Some of my clients, I have them on a low carbs on non-training days, and some of them I don't. Some of them just repeat the cycle. Because sometimes in my theory in my head, well, if I have to train today and I'm training back and my carbs are 50% or 40% down from my higher day, I'm going to create a massive deficit today, right? Well, actually, probably won't be that much deficit, but you're going to have a deficit much more than you are on your high days. So I might create a more advantageous increase in appetite doing that versus not training, sitting around, just eating less food, and then so forth. Because as you know, like in the off season, people don't realize that like what I ate yesterday is really what's going to be fueling me today, especially in the off season. Glycogen stores are maxed out when you're eating that many carbohydrates, So in one day, you're down from say 800 to 400 or 500 to 300. It's not at the end of the world, and you're probably going to feel better anyway, more energy, because your body's not in that constant state of digestion.
And you have found with your competitors that implementing carb cycling or having some low days interspersed within there, has that done a better job of keeping their hunger in a good place through an extended period of time compared to a continuous approach?
100%, and it helps control their body fat. Because
Excellent.
some people, you got to watch their body fat carefully because genetically they just carry a higher amount of body fat. And you don't want them getting to the point where they have to diet for 6 months. You know what I mean? So I will make sure that they keep body fat to a reasonable amount for them. If there's somebody who's sanely lean, I have a guy who's really lean, and I just tell him sometimes, I'm like, dude, 2 peanut butter and fluff sandwiches a day, like add them to your regimen anytime you want, just because I can't possibly add more food to his plan, you know? So at that point, you got to start adding high calorie things. I told him to go out and buy Nutella or fluff and peanut butter and Wonder white bread. I go, the worst stuff possible just to get the extra like 600-700 calories in a day. And he can do it, and it doesn't mess up the digestive system. Most people are like, why white bread? Well, because if they're consuming whole grain bread and you're consuming all that wheat and fiber, you could also cause more gas and bloating because they're already way above their fiber intake anyway at that point, you know?
Yeah, I do find the entire concept of carbohydrate or calorie cycling to be pretty interesting. It seems like a lot of people within the bodybuilding industry have found great success with this approach. It's something that's been utilized traditionally for a long time. Unfortunately, we don't have any good research papers on competitive bodybuilders and one group using carbohydrate cycling, the other not. And it can be kind of tough to figure out what's going on there. Perhaps there is some sort of benefit in terms of preserving insulin sensitivity throughout the off season. But regardless, I've found what you have found, and I think that incorporating some low days here and there over the course of the week can be beneficial for basically making it easier to adhere to a overall caloric surplus. I've just seen that, weeks on end, daily, very high calorie intakes, it tends to get pretty monotonous pretty quickly, and you don't feel too great. And just having a low day, similarly to having a refeed while you're dieting, can just have a whole lot of benefit.
Right. Psychological benefit too. Sometimes I tell people, I had a recent guy, he's been eating a lot of food for a long time, and he was a tough gainer. So he was pretty much eating a lot of food every day, not cycling, because not everybody I cycle in the off season. And I told him last week that we're going to do 10 days of lower calories just to kind of let the body chill out because he gained a good amount of weight. And his first response was, oh, thank God. Oh my God, thank God. Yeah. Most people are like, off season, you could eat all that stuff. That's great. I'm like, they have no idea. Off season, honestly, is horrible. If you really do an off season right, it is not fun by any means. I most tell people the most fun time of the year is the 8 to 10 weeks post show because you're lean, you're hungry, you're eating food, training's awesome. And after that, it's like watching paint dry. And then when you're in prep, you're hungry and you can't wait to eat, So it's not generally desirable at all. I much prefer a preparation on a diet tenfold than off season, because at least you're looking forward to everything you're eating versus being like, oh my God, it's noon already, I have to eat again. You're like, oh my gosh.
I couldn't agree more. In terms of the general population, of course, we are kind of in the midst of a worldwide obesity crisis. And, a lot of people will look at competitive bodybuilders and think, oh, look at all the food they get to eat. Like, I wish I could be like them. But because they've never had to experience the difficulty of force feeding yourself in order to reach your goals, it sounds like an appealing concept on paper, but it's most certainly not for those of us who experienced it. And I think many would agree in this field that the off season might be harder than contest prep because a lot of us ultimately do really enjoy the difficulty of contest prep, but really just shoveling the food down can be super difficult.
Yeah, and you don't feel great. You're not like eating all the food, walking around and being like, man, I feel great. You feel pretty sluggish because your body's just in that constant mode of digestion. I feel the best in the morning. Sometimes I used to get up in the off season earlier than I needed to just not to eat and walk around for an hour and a half, Then I feel great. Cup of coffee, don't wait an hour and a half until I have to eat, and then you're like, oh, this is good, instead of waking up right away and eating. Being in that fasted state for a small period of time sometimes feels good,
Absolutely. All right, Chris, that's all I got for you today. Thank you so much for your time. This has been a blast,
Awesome.
a super insightful conversation. I know the listeners are going to get a ton out of this. For the listeners who may not already be supporting you, where can they learn more about you and what you're doing?
I have a website, TuttleNutrition.com, and you can find me on Instagram, IFBPro, and I have an app. You can see that link on my Instagram page and my website, and it's basically an all-around app where we do exercise demonstrations, all the information that I've ever made as far as videos, content, papers have all kind of compiled into one app. It's very inexpensive, just to give people some knowledge all in one, and they have a Q&A that goes on all the time that I can answer questions for them as well. But that's about it, man. And I just let everybody know I'm not taking on any clients right now. Every time I do a podcast, I always get kind of a wave. I'm maxed. I have a waiting list. You can email me to be put on that list, but it's about, at this point in time, today is what? What is today? 19th?
This is 18th.
18th. So probably looking at end of September. And then I'll get going from there.
Awesome. And that will all be in the show notes. That does it for another episode of the Muscle Memoirs Podcast. Thank you so much for listening, everyone.